To get started. So thank you very much for everybody that has joined us tonight. This is session 7 and tonight we're going to focus on data and analysis. As always, we will have a large number of attendees, so we ask that you keep your camera and microphones off during the presentation. I think we've actually managed to kind of disable these at this point. Just that kind of helps with the bandwidth, and we have posted the link into the chat, which is for the register. All that we ask is that you fill in basically where you're from in terms of local authority or establishment or university, just because some of them ask us to keep track of numbers on their behalf. So if you're able just to click that one in, that would be great. And just a reminder of the different accessibility features that you should have. So you will be able to adapt the slides. If you want to be able to see those in terms of full screen, you can click the 3 dots at the top of Teams, and also you can turn on live captions. And just a reminder that if you are travelling home, we hope that you've managed to pull in somewhere safe as you are travelling. And just a reminder tonight that the session is being recorded. Now, as always, sometimes the chat can move quite quickly and we sometimes end up missing questions, which is why we have a separate car park on this Padlet. So you are welcome at any point during the session. If you've got a comment or something that you would like to ask, you can put it into the Padlet, and then we will keep an eye on that and pick up anything. We just pause every so often just to check anything that's coming in, and we try to bring them in as best we can throughout the session. So before we get started tonight, we thought it would be important just to take a moment to think about what is data. So I'm going to ask you first of all to post some of your suggestions into the chat about what do you think data is.
And don't be shy. It's always scary to be that first person.
Great, so I can see some things that are coming through here. Information that is collected in relation to a given question or a topic, numbers, images, words, information. Information is organised, numbers and information, a lot of people saying information such as numbers and statistics, information that's been collected, evidence, unorganised information, facts and statistics, things that you use to collate for things like surveys, facts. That's great. Now I would like you to have a think about where would you find data? And again, if you just pop some of your thoughts into the chat, where would you find data? Okay, some people say in food labelling, you might find it in a survey or a questionnaire, in class, at home, in the wider world, in the environment around you, in newspapers, online surveys, websites, and quite a lot of people have picked the answer that we would say that data really is, it's everything and it's everywhere. And one thing that we kind of want to draw out tonight is the importance around data is more than just numbers. So data can be descriptive, so things like I'm 6 years old, she's wearing black shoes, this bottle holds 1 litre of water. So data is the facts or information that describe and differentiate people, objects and other entities. It can be expressed as a number, and it's important as we go through tonight to think about, do learners understand what we mean when we use the term data? Do they understand that it is more than just numbers? And do we use the term data? And when we do use it, do we explain to them what it means? You know, we know that data is information. It's what we see, it's what we hear, it's what we touch. And as we go through this session tonight, we will discuss different ways that you can embed data handling in the classroom or setting that you're in. And we're going to talk through some of the different types of data handling activities and different conversations that you can use and adapt with your own learners. So we thought that it was important just to kind of take a moment to reflect on why it is important for learners to develop data and analysis skills. So we know that data and numbers are manipulated all of the time. And we want our learners to have developed the skills, not just to understand data, but to question the data that is out there. So really what we're looking for is for learners to become more data literate, so that they'll be able to navigate and understand the world around them. So things that they see or read in the news, they can make judgments about how reliable and also how credible the information is, and also about things that they see advertised and things available online. And being able to understand data also helps learners to think about some of the different choices and decisions that they're making, and it helps them to make an informed choice because their data literacy skills help them to develop that understanding about different marketing techniques which can be used to influence choices and decisions. And as we go through tonight, we'll show you some of the different ways that it can also be used to develop learners' digital skills, because there's lots of different software and programs that can be used to collect, interpret, organise and display data. And I think as a team, we were thinking about this as we were getting ready to prepare this presentation, and we found it really difficult to come up with a job where you wouldn't need to have, say, Excel skills. And so it's when we think about data and analysis, it also provides quite a good avenue to discuss the different kind of jobs and the different roles and how data is used across different industries. So, for example, you might think about, well, how would a local shop use data about favourite crisp survey compared to what a local dentist might take out from that data? And hopefully, as we go through the session tonight, you'll see that there's a really strong link between the importance of data and analysis skills and how these link to skills for learning, life and work. So when we teach data and analysis, we expose learners to lots of different ways that data can be organised and displayed. So I'm going to give you a moment just to consider some of the different ways that you can think of. So feel free to post these into the chat, or you might just want to note them down on your own piece of paper. And don't worry if you're repeating what other people have said. So fantastic, we've got somebody saying graph there. Pictogram, a picture. A pie chart, a list, a poster. A census, very relevant just now, yep. A line graph, a table. Great, so lots of things there. And as we go through tonight, we will touch on quite a lot of these. We've got tally marks coming through, frequency tables, Carroll diagrams. That's great, lots of ideas there. And on the next slide, we've got some of the different ways that we can use to display data. We see that some of these have come through in the chat already. Some of them, depending on the kind of stage that you're based in, you might be very familiar with these, whereas others, the likes of Carroll diagram, frequency table, you might be less familiar with depending on the stage that you're based at. So when you're coming to kind of plan any lessons relating to data, it might be worth having a look at one of our glossaries. So this one is the one that comes with the Data and Analysis Professional Learning Resource, and it gives just quite a brief overview of each of the different types of methods. And we also have a glossary which has been created for Parent Zone. This one has a bit more detail in it, and it's also good to share with parents, for example, if you are introducing a new kind of way of displaying data. The glossaries have been written in kind of parent-friendly language, so again, a good one to kind of share with parents. So I'm going to hand over now to Maria, who's going to talk a little bit about how the data and analysis skills begin to develop through the curriculum.
Thank you, Yvonne, and good evening, everyone. So if you've come to our sessions previously, you'll know that we try to frame our thoughts, particularly but not exclusively at early level, around the spaces, interactions and experiences approach that's recommended in the Realising the Ambition Being Me document, and tonight will be no different. So if we move on to the next slide, it's important that we're considering when we're thinking about our spaces, we're thinking about those indoor and outdoor spaces, because what we want is to make sure that we're fully supporting, consolidating and extending the learning in and out. Providing open-ended materials offers the potential for creative explorations through both child-initiated and adult-initiated learning experiences. And the spaces that we offer should be planned to provide a balance of opportunities for learners to play, explore, investigate and question. And these opportunities should enable learners to start to make sense of the data that they see around them. I've been working with my own local authorities, particularly at early level, looking at what an environmental audit might look like. And they've been coming back to say that they've really valued that idea of stepping back and noticing and reflecting what happens across their own spaces. And some of the things, in particular when I'm thinking about data, a couple of the questions that you might want to consider is, do we have a range of charts and signs across all our spaces? And again, that includes both indoors and outdoors. And what do the learners do with those? Do we provide a wide range of materials for learners so that they are able then to make decisions about what they would like to collect and sort and organise? So there are other reflective questions that we might want to consider here, but it's about that stepping back and thinking about the spaces that we offer. So learners should be provided with lots of opportunities to become curious, and we've said these things before. We want them to be creative, we want them to be problem solvers and critical thinkers, and they can do that by investigating the area around them, both within their playroom or classroom, but also that wider environment. We want them to become skilled at looking for signs, labels, charts and any visual prompts, but also be provided with those opportunities for the dialogue that goes alongside it. And that dialogue might be about what the purpose of those signs are. So you might want to be thinking about questions such as, who might read that sign? Who might use it? What's the purpose of that sign? I wonder what would happen if that sign wasn't there. Because those questions that we ask and plan can spark that enthusiasm and maybe hook them in. But we also want to encourage learners to make their own signs and labels and to make sure that they are purposeful. We'll just move on now to looking at experiences. And it's worth considering how we can use those daily opportunities such as attendance, lunch choices, the play areas that the learners explore, to think about ways of capturing and discussing data with the children. And we want to make sure that learners can tell a story about the data collected. They might think about, oh, there's 5 people here today, 1 person is not here today, what does that tell us? And just, taking that conversation a wee bit further. There are lots of people off today. 8 people have packed lunches. I wonder if there are more or less having a school dinner today. How many more children can play in this area, for example, compared to the library? So it's about providing those opportunities for comparisons, for discussion, and to make conjectures. And opportunities to collect and sort real objects into categories is very important. Providing materials which are relevant and real will be much more meaningful to the learners. We can encourage them to decide which objects they would like to sort, and then they can sort the objects using their own criteria. And then it's important to give them time to explain their choices. They might choose categories such as organising by colour, by size, by shape, pattern, length or texture, but they also might have ideas of their own that they want to use to categorise the items they've collected. The key here is that they're provided with opportunities to make the decisions and then can explain those choices. It's important that learners develop an understanding that there are different ways of categorising some objects. Playful interactions can be used as the vehicle through which children acquire knowledge and skills, allowing children to engage independently and also with others. The role of teachers or other adults in the room or the environment is to enable and scaffold those playful experiences and learning, and this requires thoughtful planning. For example, setting out materials that we might think will pique the children's curiosity. Those spontaneous interactions building on natural curiosities and ideas and following the children's lead is very important. We're looking to provide children with active and playful hands-on experiences which will foster and enrich learning. And one way of doing this is introducing the idea through a question or providing an engaging context or provocation to prompt learners to suggest questions which they can then investigate for themselves. And one example that I've come up with is just about maybe asking the children, what did you do at the weekend? And if the children replies to say maybe they went to the park, using that as an opportunity then to ask more questions, using those I wonder statements that we refer to quite often. So I wonder how many parks are in our environment, our neighbourhood. How many other children do you think go to the parks? How many different parks could they go to? How could we find out what the most popular parks are? All of these types of questions require different types of information, but they're all about parks. What we're trying to do is just spark an interest that follows the children's interest. So just to get that little hook. And again, we need to allow time to explore the possibilities. Can they make those conjectures about what they might find out? Not all learners have this skill developed, so it's really up to us to model, scaffold and support this. To help them see learning opportunities during their play and to use playful interactions to support their understanding of language whilst encouraging them to talk about and discuss their learning. Help them to notice, help them to question themselves and ask questions of others as they play and learn. And as well as encouraging the learners to notice, it's important that we too step back and notice. And at times this might involve giving the learners enough space and time to work through some ideas. Let them work through and learn from their mistakes, but also take time to observe the children's learning so that we can then deepen or extend their understanding. And involving the children in the planning stage is really important. We want them to be engaged and invested from the outset. So work together with the children to solve problems, clarify concepts, develop thinking, to develop those high quality interactions with our learners. We're now going to just go through some stages of data handling with you. So what you're seeing just now is a bit of a stage that you might want to follow. When planning data handling opportunities for learners, what we would say is it's really important to ensure that you're providing a balance of activities, and that would include collecting the data, organising it, representing it in an appropriate way, providing opportunities for interpretation and discussion about what the data tells them. Sometimes it will start with a question that needs answered, like the one about the park, but then it moves on to a plan being made to collect the relevant information in some way. The data can then be organised and presented in an appropriate way, enabling some conclusions to be drawn. Sometimes this might result in more questions coming through, and so further exploration may be needed, and sometimes the process is repeated depending on what the learners bring. But at early level, just moving on to the next slide, at early level, learning about data starts with counting and sorting, and there are lots of ways to incorporate this learning about data in everyday contexts. So for example, you could use a selection of cars, you're seeing that on the slide just now, and asking the learners how they could sort them. Using those I wonder statements again really helps here. I wonder which colour of car we have the most of. Again, using a storybook is a great stimulus. So reading the book and then using the example that's on the screen just now, I love pizza. Read the book and then ask the children to show their hands if they do indeed love pizza. And I'm assuming that most of the class probably will. So maybe make the statement, so everybody loves pizza then. But maybe just stopping for a second to say, but how do we know? How can we be sure that everybody loves pizza? How could we find out for sure? And again, taking those responses from the children about how we could find out for sure. Or using similar statements. It might always seem like it, but it doesn't always rain in Scotland. But if we make statements like it always rains in Scotland, older children can run faster than younger children. No one likes Brussels sprouts. So using statements like that, maybe just to allow the children to investigate that. What data could we use to collect to see if these statements are true, and how could we collect them? And when we're collecting data, it's beneficial to ensure we provide activities where pupils have some choice, where they get to decide what is to be collected and how it will be displayed. And again, engaging in dialogue with learners about what information they have chosen to collect and how they're going to collect it is a good way to probe for further understanding. Learners need to make detailed judgments when they're thinking about data handling. They need to think about how to count, how to measure, how to organise and how to present their data. These skills are complicated, but an important aspect of everyday life. So it's important that we provide learners with the opportunity to interpret data collected by others as well as themselves, so that they consider how it was collected and how they can then interrogate it. So when we think about that cycle that I shared, they don't always need to go through the whole cycle every time. They can start by interrogating the data collected by someone else. So learning about organising data starts with sorting. The images that you see here are used to represent examples of objects that you might have in your setting, which could be used as useful data sets. And the idea is that there should be spontaneous opportunities to sort these in different ways. I've mentioned some of these before, so by size, by colour, by shape. So it's helpful that the collections are different in size and they are different in different ways. There are lots of opportunities for reinforcing counting strategies in this sort of activity. And it's useful for practitioners to watch and observe as learners count, as this can indicate their current levels of understanding or highlight some misconceptions. Sometimes it would appear that there may be issues with data handling in general, but sometimes the issue can be a numeracy-related problem. We can also allow learners to share and discuss the different ways they've sorted the objects, as this can really support learning and identify those misconceptions or misunderstandings. So some of the questions that you might want to ask, and again, you'll know your learners best, is how many do we have altogether? How many red shapes? How many more yellow cards than red cards? And looking at that last option there with the vegetables, the fruit and veg, there are lots of opportunities there that the learners might want to sort. They might sort them by what they like, what they know, what is a fruit, what's veg. They might sort them by colour. They might sort it into things that they know, that they've tasted, things that they don't know. The possibilities there are endless, and that's the type of data set that really allows for that rich engagement. Sorting concrete objects can really support learning in number. So if we ask, for example, how many more yellow cars there are in that first arrangement that you're seeing, could be really difficult for learners, and you'll know yourself when you've watched learners count. They'll probably miscount, they might count objects more than once, they might miss out some of them altogether. So we might need to model and scaffold this. So by sorting them in a slightly different arrangement, as you're seeing on screen just now, can be much more effective, and it makes that question much easier to answer. And again, asking the question, I wonder if it matters whether the display is arranged horizontally or vertically, will that make a difference? Again, posing that to the learners for them to investigate. Venn diagrams can also be a great approach to sort items, but we're going to look at that a wee bit later on in the session. So there are many models that can be used to enable pupils to represent data, and it's through exploring a variety of models that pupils will get to deepen their understanding of data. Various models display and communicate information in slightly different ways, and it's necessary to challenge pupils to consider the benefits and the limitations of each of the models. Which graph or chart is best to represent the data and why? And sometimes rather than jumping straight to representing data in a bar chart or a pictogram, children can use some of the concrete materials that they've been using for other parts of their learning. So they could count the data by adding counters to a 10 frame. They could use interlocking paper clips or pegs to represent a quantity. And we should aim to identify opportunities for data handling conversations and activities in our everyday routines and through our contexts. And one of the keys to making a graph or chart easier for young children to comprehend is to make it less abstract. With very young children, the easiest way to do this is to physically build the chart. For example, a pictogram about fruit can be built using real oranges and apples and bananas and pears placed on a large grid. You could use name stickers that could be stuck onto the fruit to help the children see where their individual vote has been placed and how this adds up to the totals. In the same way that a chart can be built using items, it's also possible to create one using the children themselves. So thinking about a human chart. And this could be done naturally throughout the day, asking questions along the way to develop that intuitive understanding of data. You could use photographs of the children, for example, to compile a graph. This can be done physically with paper and glue, but you can also use the interactive whiteboard or a chart drawn on a notebook that comes with some graphing software. You could get the children to stick or drag their photo onto the chart themselves. And again, this hands-on experience will help them to understand how the chart is created, but visually shows how their individual votes are compiled to create that overview. The important point I want to make here is after creating the graph or the chart, remember to make use of it. The children need to see it being used in order to understand how it can help them find information and help tell that data story. Data can and should be used to make decisions. One idea is to get the children to look at a graph showing the most popular role play area and then choosing the next week's theme based on the numbers presented in the graph, so they can really see then that what they've gathered and the questions they've asked has been used for a purpose. Asking questions alongside the visual, which option is most or the least popular, but then follow on those interests. At early level, pictograms should be created using real life objects that learners can place down informally and begin to make comparisons with. It's those visual representations and the involvement of the children which will help them retain the learning. So what they're doing is they're learning experientially. I love these examples here, and I wish I had known more about these, I have to say, when I was teaching. So what you're looking at here are examples and non-examples. This is a really good way to initiate dialogue between learners and to allow them, through their exploration, to some of the realisation that the sizing and the spacing matters. What's the same here? What's different? Really encouraging the learners to look and question what they see and what it tells them. And sometimes, and I've mentioned it earlier, making mistakes is the perfect way for learners to come up with the solutions themselves. As learners progress into first level, through lots of practice with those examples and non-examples and the discussion involved in that, learners will begin to realise the importance of things like the title and the key. We start to consider how one picture could represent more than one. It could be part of the whole. And again, we might want to be practising things like skip counting and ask them to consider what Tuesday's total might be and why. And again, it's that justification of their answer that's important here. So all too often in our experience, too much time is spent on drawing the graphs or the charts and not always enough time spent on actually finding out what the graph or the chart is telling us. So it's that interpretation. We really want the learners to be able to tell us the story that the data tells them. And when learners are tasked with analysing the data, if they're tasked with that at all, sometimes we find it's confined to identifying the most or the least popular item. These limitations tend to restrict the interest and the variety of the context that are explored and fail to engage the learners in any significant mathematical thinking. Pupils need to understand what the graph is saying, and this requires high levels of thinking. So again, it's about that, can you justify? If we're displaying data in a bar graph, we might ask questions such as, which bar was the easiest or the hardest to identify and why? And this opportunity allows learners to see and understand the significance of the labels. What other questions might we have based on what we see? So 4 people did not like the game using the first example. I wonder why. Could there be more than one reason? How might we find out? So it's about taking the data and then investigating it further through our questioning and following the children's interests. Before analysing the data, are learners able to effectively formulate hypotheses about what they think the data will tell them? We want to engage learners in conversations which will support them to make sense of the data. The ability to make inferences and predictions based on data is a critical skill all learners need to develop. Using true and false statements when analysing or summarising can ensure learners are thinking deeply about what they see and the meaning behind it, and provides opportunities for learners to justify or not. So when analysing data, we might want to ask questions such as, what pattern do you see? What does this graph tell you? Who could use this data and how could they use it? By doing so, we're developing transferable skills across other curricular areas and beyond. The ability to collect information or data, present it appropriately, interpret its findings is an important aspect of everyday life. Surveys, graphs and charts are often used by the media to inform, persuade and at times mislead. So it's really important at this early level that we are developing some of those critical skills in our young learners. Pass to you now, Jacqueline.
Thanks, Mia. So what we're going to do now is we're going to have a wee screen break because we appreciate that you've probably rushed right here after school. So we'll just take 5 minutes. For those of you that aren't keen to move away from the screen or would just rather sit where you are, what we want you to do is just have a wee look at this graph. And we know we talked about slow reveal graphs in the developing a problem-solving approach session, but just we thought we'd look at it again just very briefly today, just because we are looking at data and analysis. So what to do is you can post in the chat what you notice about this, what you wonder about this graph, or you can take a wee 5-minute break. So that's 4:32. We'll come back at 4:37 and carry on from there. So feel free to ask questions in the chat about anything else as well. We'll still be here, but for the rest, you can take a wee screen break should you wish. Observations of what you noticed or what you wondered about. We did talk about slow reveal graphs in a previous session, but I think it is just worth revisiting it today just with us looking at data. So in the slow reveal graph approach, graphs are gradually introduced one step at a time. And more information is released as the time goes on. So in this case here you can see, and I like the comment somebody said earlier on about the labels haven't been marked, and this really helps learners see the importance of all of these things rather than you just saying put the title, label the axis, because sometimes you feel like a bit of a broken record there. So this approach can really help them see why there is a need for that. So as more and more of the graph is revealed, so now you might say, what new information do we have now? So take a wee moment just to look at that. What new information do we have? Has it changed your thinking of what you thought the graph might be about? Maybe you decided you didn't want to make a decision at that point because you didn't have enough information. But now having a look at it, what do you think the graph could be about now? So post in the chat what you think it might be about. So it could be hours of sunshine. Any other? Possibly rainfall. All very educated guesses. Average temperatures. I'm thinking birthdays in the class could be how many birthdays there are. Okay, temperature. Okay, so then you would reveal the next bit, and you can see on the left-hand side there that we have degrees Celsius, so it is linked to temperature. And then so you keep asking them, what do you notice now? How does this information help us? What questions do you still have? What other information might we need? What do we still need to know? So now you can see it's average temperatures in Scotland, and actually, and some of you guessed that, so well done. But again, it's okay to model that, even as a teacher, you might say, oh, well, I think it's about rainfall, or I think it's, such and such, so that they can see that actually it's okay to not get it right the first time. And you know what it's like when they're estimating, they like to get things right and they'll go back and adjust their estimates and things. It's not about that. It's okay to make guesses based on what they think it is to begin with. So yes, in this case, it was average temperatures in Scotland, and actually it's quite depressing when you look at it because it doesn't get very high. But yeah, it is what it is. Okay, so we also talked about goal-free graphs during that session as well, the previous session. So again, just a very quick recap, but we thought it was important to put it in here. So essentially what you're doing here is you're providing the learners with the data represented on a chart or a table, and it doesn't need to be a bar graph, it can be something else. But the only question that you actually are asking them is, what do you notice? So rather than giving them a big list of loads and loads of questions, which we quite often see, and I know I've done it myself before, this way, by just saying, what do you notice, by just giving them the graph, it really reduces that cognitive overload for the learners, and it gives them that time to stop and process what they're seeing and think about it, maybe even time to talk about it with a partner. And it's a really good way of differentiating as well, because learners will access it in different ways. Some learners will just give you some really sort of simple facts from the graph or just make some simple observations, whereas other learners might be able to challenge themselves a wee bit more and start calculating totals, calculating the difference between different parts of the graph, and you'll know which ones you can push a wee bit more. And it isn't to say that we shouldn't ever give them questions. It's okay to do that, but this is just a different approach, that if you're finding that they're just kind of mechanically getting through it and there's no depth of understanding, this can really prompt a good wee bit of dialogue with learners as well and help them learn from each other. And again, you might need to model it to begin with, because any sort of new approaches can take a wee bit of time to embed. So in the last session, we looked at Venn diagrams, and we just wanted to explore this a little bit more today, because I kind of rushed through that part of it. And I know that Maria mentioned Venn diagrams earlier on. So Venn diagrams are they're just a process for sorting data into categories. And as learners progress, they'll begin to link together relationships between sets. But before learners are ready to jump onto the full formal Venn diagrams, they can carry out activities like this or like this. And this can really lay a good foundation for when they do come to formally work with Venn diagrams later on. So in this first example here, learners have been they've just sorted into two simple categories, dinosaurs and not dinosaurs. And it's just simple as that. And it doesn't need to be dinosaurs, it could be anything. They might decide that it's going to be animals, not animals, or whatever. It doesn't really matter. Red, not red. Something really simple like that. And the second one is a bit, it's kind of going up a wee bit of a level, and they're sorting into green and brown. Now, there aren't any other examples here, but what we would always say is when you're doing something like pre-Venn diagrams or using Venn diagrams, then you need to provide them also with things that don't actually fit nicely into the sets, because that's what real life is all about. Things don't always fit nicely into sets. So actually, you could possibly have included some yellow or red leaves here that could have been put, on the outside of these circles as well. But the real key to these type of activities is just to use material or resources that the learners themselves are just showing an interest in. Follow their lead, follow their interests, let them decide on how they want to sort them, what categories they want to use. That's the kind of most important message that we're trying to get across here. So as learners progress into first level, they begin to use Venn diagrams formally to sort items into overlapping sets. And in this first example here, the categories are rectangles and purple shapes. And I think we showed this one also in the problem solving session. But you can see that all the rectangles go in the left hoop and all the purple shapes go on the right hand side. The part where the hoops are overlapping is where the purple rectangles go, because these items are both rectangles and they're both purple. But you can also see we've included some items that don't fit into any of these categories and have therefore been placed outside the hoop. And as I mentioned in the previous slide, make sure that you're including items that don't always fit. So you can get a good bit of discussion going there, and it does help learners to develop that mathematical reasoning as well. In the second example here, the categories are the 3 times table and the 4 times table. So this time the numbers which are in both the 3 and the 4 times table have been placed within the overlapping parts of the hoops. So you can see 12, 24 and 36. They're all stations of both the 3 and the 4 times table as well. Learners also should be given numbers. They could be given numbers such as 31 or anything that isn't actually in either the 3 times table or the 4 times table, so it just wouldn't fit into that category. You can create large Venn diagrams using hoops or by drawing them, just like the one on the right hand side there on the ground using chalk. Learners could also then progress to drawing smaller ones on paper or whiteboards, but that really depends on what they're categorising and whether they're using real objects or numbers or whatever they're doing. You can provide them with templates as well. This is just another example of how Venn diagrams can be used to categorise data. You can use them for science investigations, or you can use them to categorise information in lots of different curricular areas, really. And as they progress into first and second level, you can begin to increase the challenge and introduce a third data set. And in this case, we've just extended that first example. And the link at the bottom of this page is just a link to the mini guide that we've created on Venn diagrams. And there's also a blog that explains a bit more about what Venn diagrams are, should you want to explore them a wee bit more. The reason we like Venn diagrams so much is because when learners move into secondary school and they start problem solving and they have to sort things, quite often you'll see that Venn diagrams are used there and they have to work out solutions to some kind of more deeper thinking problems as well. So they are really useful for learners to have exposure to. Carol diagrams is something that you've maybe all used, maybe some of you have got more experience than others, but it's just another way of organising information. And this kind of table, it's named after a mathematician and author, Lewis Carroll as well. You probably knew that already. But it's just a way to sort data such as groups of objects, shapes, numbers, just based on properties and given a yes-no approach. So what I want you to do is have a look here. Now you can either draw this out as it is here, ignore the numbers at the bottom at the moment, but just draw this out, or if you have access to a device that you can go on and do something live, you can go on and do this online. I'll just put the link in the chat. It comes from Enrich. We do like a good Enrich task. And what I want you to do is just take a moment to place the numbers into the correct section of the Carol diagram. And I'll give you a few moments to do that. Even if you don't get it all done, if you can just start placing them in, that would be good. But if you can't access the online version of it, just a quick scribble on a piece of paper in front of you is fine. And if you don't have that, then just mentally do it as well. So a wee moment or two. We'll just stay silent while you do that. Okay, hopefully you've had a chance to kind of work through that, or even just get it started, whether it's written mentally or online. Yours should look something like this. Don't worry if you didn't get to complete it, and it might be that your numbers are kind of laid out differently within each box, but you'll just see here that this is how this should kind of end up looking. What I think it's important to do is pay close attention to the number 10, because it is an odd number. Sorry, it's not an odd number, but it's not less than 10, and the key thing there is being not less than 10, and that's why it's in the bottom right-hand part of the diagram and not the top right-hand part, because it can't be less than 10, because it is 10. So it's just, and sometimes when learners are using Carol diagrams, there might be wee tricky ones thrown in like that as well, and it's good for you to throw in wee tricky ones like that as well that might kind of generate a wee bit of extra discussion. There's just some more examples here. You can see that Carol diagrams can be used to just consolidate some learning that they've been doing in different areas of either maths, and you saw that earlier with the 3 and 4 times table. Here we've got shape, but also across other curricular areas as well. So it might be that they're looking at animals or various different things within science or something like that. So moving on to pie charts. A pie chart is a chart that uses pie slices to show relative sizes of data. Is what it is, really, what it says in the tin. We often see pie charts. If you think about the news at the moment, there's often pie charts online and on the television. There's often, you can see them online, news articles, various different things. You maybe see them sometimes showing up in social media. And the reason why is because it's just a really clear and instantaneous image of setting out how data is distributed. Sorry, I was just reading in the chat there, the resources you'd recommend for graphs to use, like the goal-free graphs. See, with the goal-free graphs, actually, if you're just using graphs, you found in textbooks or various things, just use those graphs, but take away the questions, cover them up, or, various different things. So whatever graphs you're using, it'd be fine. The slow reveal graphs are a wee bit trickier because they do take a wee bit longer to make up, because you kind of have to put them onto a PowerPoint and then just, gradually show a wee bit more each time. I do have ones that I've created for first level and second level. Yes, I've created them for both. So I'll actually add them to the Padlet as well, just so that you can see. And it's not that there's loads and loads of them, but it just kind of gives you a bit of a starter for 10 of where to go. So I'm just going to make myself a wee note of that. But really, it's just the graphs that you're using, and just kind of, it just takes time. But if you are creating them, share them, use them with your colleagues, share them so that you're not all kind of duplicating and doing extra work. So anyway, sorry, I digressed there. So yeah, pie charts, they are popular. Lots of media like to use them. So if you look at this example here, you can see it's very, very easy to see that purple is by far the most popular colour, and the green and yellow are not as popular, and that's why it's a good way to represent data. It's quick and you can see things. Pie charts also usually have a title, and they usually come with they always have a title, sorry, and they usually come with a key as well, just like the one you can see here. Sometimes you might see percentages on a graph, or sometimes the real values are marked on them as well. But it is, of course, best not to show those percentages until the learners have started to learn about the percentages, just to avoid any confusion. But most of the graphs, the pie charts that you'll see, will be 2-dimensional, but sometimes they can be 3-dimensional as well. When it comes to first and second level, learners should be able to look at pie charts and draw conclusions. But what we need to be really clear on today is that we should not be expecting learners to construct pie charts by hand at these stages. A really successful, accurate pie chart is difficult to create, and actually it involves handling of compasses, protractors, and often at a level that's just not appropriate to what the learner is working at first and second level. They need to know angles, they need to know percentages, they need to know how to use the pairs of compasses as well. And each of these aspects on their own is quite challenging, but if you put them all together and expect learners to create a hand-drawn pie chart in primary, it just might be a step far too far for some. However, some of you may have some level learners who are at the end of second level and are really looking for a wee bit more challenge. And yes, you could maybe try to do that once they have a firm understanding of percentages and things like that as well. But before that, we wouldn't be encouraging learners to be drawing pie charts earlier on, because it's just it's the gains that you get out of it are not worth what the learning would be in this case. But they can be provided with opportunities to create pie charts digitally, because this is less challenging than drawing by hand, and it's quite quick and easy to do. And it is a skill that they'll use throughout their lives using Excel. I know that Yvonne mentioned that earlier on, but we'll go into a wee bit more detail about the digital aspect of that further on. There's a nice article on teaching pie charts on NCETM, which the link is here. So if you're going back through the slides, you can just click on that. And just for a bit of fun, because we all need a bit of fun, I just thought we'd put this up. Although I'm thinking as the years go on, you know, we can't really use this as much because it's getting outdated now. But I still think everybody knows a bit of Rick Astley. It's a legend. Okay. So it's also important that learners can interpret data presented in a variety of ways. So it's important that learners can choose how to represent the data they've collected, and technology can help them to produce really good graphs and charts. But they also do benefit from understanding and using the mathematics that goes into actually creating these graphs. And I know I said that's kind of going against what I said about the pie charts, but the pie charts are a different story. But there is still a place for using good old pen and paper and ruler to create some bar graphs and line graphs as they do progress into second level, and for some at first level as well, depending what challenge they're needing. But one of the biggest challenges when learners are creating their own graphs is choosing a suitable scale. I've seen all sorts of crazy scales in my time, and it is really quite challenging, but within the benchmarks is something they are expected to learn how to do. So what we need to do is explicitly teach the different aspects and how to create them, model it, show how to do it, show them some bad examples, show them where, you know, scales have just been really used in a silly way, and different aspects where there's maybe the same data is represented but in two different ways, one usefully and one not so usefully, and get them to make comparisons as well. So when you are creating them, there's just some things that you need to consider. So making sure that the scale fits in the space provided. And the two examples here, it's the same data, but the one on the left is not just as good because it needs to be a wee bit more spread out. This is quite high level data. You probably wouldn't be using that with the learners as much. Also making sure that each scale division has the same value as well. And each division works better if it's got a value of 1, 2, 4 or 5 multiplied by some power of 10. Having value, a scale of 3 or multiples of 3 are really, really helpful and actually can be quite difficult to do. So it's just kind of worth keeping that in mind as well. All the values need to be clearly labelled and positioned correctly. And the range of data on each axis should be over half the space available. And that's why this one here is a slightly better representation than this one here. This is a really good article that gives a good guide on drawing graphs. So again, if you've got older learners, you could take out aspects of that. It could be some sort of reading activity where they go and have to pick out what would make a good graph, or even if you just want a wee bit of learning for yourself, it can be useful to look at that. So it's just a really easy to read article as well. We talked earlier about technology, and we'll talk about it again later on, but technologies really can be used so quickly to produce some really great visualizations, but there can also be some pitfalls with that. And these are two graphs that have been taken from our data professional learning resource, and actually they both show exactly the same data. But at first glance, there does seem a dramatic drop in performance and test scores in that first graph. But actually, if you look at it really closely, particularly in the second graph there, that it's actually the differences are marginal at best when you look at that complete picture. And the reason why is if you look, this one here has been cut off, what we call truncated. It starts at 79, it doesn't start at 0. And quite often this approach is used by newspapers or other publications, and there may be practical reasons behind that to save space, or maybe it could be for deliberate reasons, which is just to make uninteresting data look more controversial, or to make a bit of a news story out of something. So it's really important that you kind of look at that. And in these two graphs, you can look at them both with the learners. Which one's more accurate? Why? Which one's a better representation of the figures as well? So, and I think you'll be more and more aware of that. When you see exam results coming out and they're scrutinised in newspapers and things like that, you'll probably look twice at them now, I think, after having a look at that. So that's enough of my voice for now. I'm going to hand you back to Yvonne.
Thank you. So there is quite a useful page that is on Wikipedia that describes a number of the kind of common occurring ways in which graphs can be misleading. So we have put that on the slide there. And the one that's on screen here, you can see an example where scale has been used in a way to mislead the viewer. So although category B has a numerical value that's 3 times that of A, by enlarging the picture that is used, actually the area becomes 9 times larger. So that way, if you look in the kind of comparison, it does make it look quite misleading just because they've made the picture a bit bigger. And so it's really important that we begin to gather examples to kind of have that discussion with learners about what makes graphs not so good and how could data be displayed more effectively. So we've got a couple more examples that we'll have a little look at, and on this one you can see again what Jacqueline was talking about, where the y-axis doesn't start at 0, and again they've used the pictures enlarged across the image. So having a look at this, it makes it look like the average Indian woman is tiny and the average Latvian woman is, you know, massively intimidating there. And actually, if we begin to look at the kind of information that's displayed there, is the average South African woman really half the size of the average Scottish person? I would not imagine, you know, that's why it's quite misleading. And it is worth collecting different examples as you see these. You know, you'll see them on the news, you'll see them in different magazines and things where data has been manipulated in different ways. And again, provides a really rich discussion for learners in terms of, well, how could you remake this graph to make it less misleading? We know that at second level, learners begin to work towards being able to draw conclusions about the reliability of data. And as part of that, it's about taking into consideration the sample size. So you'll often notice that, you know, quite bold claims are made in advertisements, but often when you begin to look at the data behind it, it's been with a very small sample size. So at second level, learners really need to be able to question what kind of conclusions can you draw when surveys and you know, results are based on such a small amount of data. You know, is this really reliable? And it's an interesting discussion when you begin to ask, well, you know, how big a sample size should we be going for? How big is big enough? And, you know, there's always that balance that needs to be struck between collecting enough data that makes sure your collections are reliable, but often the amount of time or resources that are necessary to collect and interpret lots and lots of data. But the kind of general principle is that the larger the sample size, the more reliable the data is. And that's one that we hope that learners will become familiar with as they're working at second level. So in this example, you can see that the claims are a bit vague, a bit woolly, the sample size isn't that big, and this type of example can be useful to begin to explore different marketing techniques and to discuss why some companies might choose to purposefully display their data and their results in a particular way. As we mentioned at the beginning of the session, we know that data handling ties in really well with digital skills, and you know, there's a strong link between improving digital skills and improving data and analysis skills. So the E's and O's in the maths curriculum make explicit reference to using digital technologies to collect, to organise and to display data. So this might include things like gathering data from an electronic survey, so something like Google Forms or Microsoft Forms, and if you scan the QR code there, you'll see just a really simple one that's been created using one of those. It might also include inputting data that's been gathered using the likes of Excel or different display tools that are available in the likes of Excel and PowerPoint. And as Jacqueline was saying, before, at first and second level, there's no expectation for learners to be hand drawing pie charts, but exploring them digitally, because it kind of removes the need to know about the compass and the angles and the, exchanging into percentages. At least that way they're beginning to get an experience of how a pie chart is constructed and how it's laid out and how it's labelled. We've also included a link tonight to one of the video clips that our colleague George in the digital team has recorded. So the link takes you to an 8-minute video, and it's all about how to link data and analysis skills with digital skills. So in the video, he explores some of the links between the E's and O's, and he also shows you some of the examples about how you can use Google Data GIF Maker, Excel spreadsheets, as well as exploring some of the different information that is available in simple electronic tables and databases. Jacqueline, have we got time to watch this one, or should we just include the link with the slides?
I think we'll just include the link with the slide. It's just short, but I think there's probably enough in the session for tonight.
That's great. And just to kind of round up tonight, here are some of the different ways that you can begin to make links with data across the curriculum. So considering how you might cover E's and O's from the likes of health and wellbeing, social studies and science. It might include things like surveys around your favourite food, collecting information about the local community through traffic surveys or litter surveys, or gathering data about the local environment local to the school, so things like a bird watch, or investigating different climate zones and different weather. And then when we think about some of the other areas of the curriculum into second level, you might begin to think about how you can classify and compare different types of data, such as classifying living things, and also looking across different countries as well. And there are also E's and O's which link to the influence of data and the media and advertising, and the likes of the health and wellbeing. So again, ones that are quite good to make that link when you are beginning to explore this through your maths lessons. So just to kind of finish off today, here are the different links that we've used. You'll also get access to these in the Padlet, which we will share the link to as well. We have got 2 sessions to go. It's really hard to believe that we are kind of almost coming to the end of this series. So we've got the one that's taking place in May, which is about taking numeracy and maths outdoors. And then we have got the one in June, which is about teaching ideas of chance and uncertainty, and also an opportunity for you to share your final reflections. Jacqueline, did you want to come in here?
Yeah, so I was just going to...
Oh, you're on mute.
Sorry. What we've done is we have added to the outdoor session, which is really probably only about 40 minutes, and we've added a half-hour session on effective questioning approaches in numeracy and maths as well, just to complement the guide that we have recently published. But you don't need to go away and read that or anything before. We'll go through it and unpick it with you, and then you can look at that in your own time. But it's just so that you know that you're kind of getting more bang for your buck next time. So you'll get maths outdoors and effective questioning approaches in numeracy and maths as well.
That's great. Maria, did you want to come in there? No, that's fine. So I noticed that Jacqueline has popped the link into the chat for signing up to that one. And we also have the link that when you get the slides, you'll be able to access it there for signing up to the Maths Outdoors on the 18th of May. And just a little reminder before we finish off, some regions have got their drop-ins coming up, so it's worth having a look. Again, just a reinforcement that this is an opportunity for you to come together in a much smaller group. You will have at least 2 education officers from Education Scotland there. And it's a chance for you to really kind of ask any questions about the course or maths in general. We've had people come along with quite specific questions about groupings and assessments, planning materials and things like that. So it really is an opportunity for you to explore in a bit more detail and kind of have that space to do so in a smaller group. So we really would encourage you to kind of come along and we are there to help and to kind of support as you're beginning to unpick some of the ideas that we go over in the course. And as I said before, all of the links that we have included tonight, including the recording that Ian's made for us, and the slides will be available on the Padlet, which is a kind of overview of all the different things that we've covered throughout the session. And if you want to go back and watch any of the previous presentations, they are all linked on there as well. So just a big thank you to everybody for coming along tonight. We will hang around at the end, and if you do want to come in and ask a question, if you just raise your hand, then we can unmute you from our side and or pop it into the chat and we can answer those. But thank you very much for coming along, and we look forward to seeing people in May again, so enjoy your Easter holidays.
And bonus points to us for finishing 20 minutes early. Sure, that'll be well seen.
That's a first, isn't it?
It is a first, I know. So yeah, I've just put that slide back up, so if anybody wants to scan into, because just sometimes that's quicker for people. But yeah, but we'll hang about. Our time's protected just now, so we'll still be here.